we're going to look at Psalm 4. But in order to look at Psalm 4, I think it really helps to just be aware of Psalm 3. So we're actually going to read both Psalms. But before we read Psalm 3 or Psalm 4, I think it would help if we actually read what a commentary says about them. So like we'll get a picture here, and this will help us all understand why we would care about Psalm 3 as we look at Psalm 4. We have not done Psalm 3 in here. We will do Psalm 3 in here on April 26th. That's when we have it picked for the evening. But they connect. So Psalm 3, Sonsino says this: a morning prayer in distress. The psalm speaks for itself. It is a sublime expression of trust in God's help when beset by relentless enemies. A close connection with Psalm 4 is discernible, and the latter is to be understood as its sequel. From Psalm 3:6, it is deduced that we have here a morning prayer, whereas Psalm 4:9 suggests a night prayer. The first of the two psalms is accordingly a cry of the heart called forth by a present danger, and the second is a song of relief uttered when the peril seems less imminent. The circumstance is specified in the superscription. And you'll notice in the superscription in Psalm 3, a psalm of David when he fled from Absalom, his son. Then in Psalm 4, up at the top right, what does Sonsino say? An evening prayer and relief. The same spirit pervades the psalm as the former, and they should be read together. The writer now feels that his reliance upon God in his time of trouble has been justified, and a sense of tranquility possesses him. So let's read Psalm 3, a psalm of David, when he fled from Absalom, his son. Lord, how have they increased who trouble me? Many are they who rise up against me. Many are they who say of me, there is no help for him in God. Selah. But you, O Lord, are a shield for me, my glory and the one who lifts up my head. I cried to the Lord with my voice, and he heard me from his holy hill. Selah. I lay down and slept. I awoke, for the Lord sustained me. I will not be afraid of 10,000s of people who have set themselves against me all around. Arise, O Lord. Save me, O my God. For you have struck all my enemies on the cheekbone. You have broken the teeth of the ungodly. Salvation belongs to the Lord. Your blessing is upon your people. Selah. And then Psalm 4. To the chief musician, with stringed instruments, a psalm of David. Hear me when I call, O God of my righteousness. You have relieved me in my distress. Have mercy on me and hear my prayer. How long, O you sons of men, will you turn my glory into shame? How long will you love worthlessness and seek falsehood? Selah. But know that the Lord has set apart for himself him who is godly. The Lord will hear when I call to him. Be angry and do not sin. Meditate within your heart on your bed and be still. Selah. Or for the righteous sacrifices of righteousness, and put your trust in the Lord. There are many who say, who will show us any good? Lord, lift up the light of your countenance upon men. You have put gladness in my heart, more than in the season that their grain and wine increased. I will both lie down in peace and sleep. For you alone, O Lord, make me dwell in safety. So we'll go to the bottom of page 2. We already read a good bit. And I just kind of want to help us to see why there's good evidence for thinking that these two psalms are connected. Separate psalms, sometimes it looks like, for example, Psalm 9 and 10 may have originally perhaps been one psalm. Perhaps we looked at that. They're really connected. But these two psalms were never thought to be one psalm, but they are thought to be connected. And there's reasons for that. For example, this phrase, many say, in Psalm 3, verse 2, and in verse 4, verse 6. If you look back on the first page, verse 3, verse 2, many are they who say of me. And then in 4, verse 6, there are many who say. So the phrase, and in fact, the Hebrew is exactly the same, and they're the only two verses in the Bible where that exact Hebrew appears. So, like, that's a pretty big coincidence to have the exact same Hebrew, exactly the same, two Psalms that are consecutive like that. And then Psalm 3, verse 5a, the first half, and Psalm 4, verse 8, the first half, the Hebrew is not exactly the same, but it's evident that the thought is pretty much the same. I lay down and slept, and I will both lie down in peace and sleep. Hebrew's not identical, but that's pretty close. So you've got an exact phrase in the Hebrew. You've got a thought that's really similar. And then you've got the thought that Sansina brought out that that Psalm 3 is a morning psalm, and there's clear evidence of that, like the word rise, like get up in verse 1, or I awoke in verse 5, or arise, O Lord, in verse 7. And then Psalm 4 is an evening psalm. Meditate within your heart on your bed. Clearly, that's a night thought. Or I will lie down in peace and sleep. So again, you've got a morning and an evening. You've got good reasons for thinking these two psalms should be read together and are somehow connected. Then as we go over to the next page, okay, we can see, and this becomes significant on the second half of the page, but Psalms 3 through 8, and we've seen this before in here, that these psalms are all psalms that seem to go morning, evening, morning, evening, morning, evening. Almost like the psalmist is saying, the psalms are this this rhythm of life. It kind of opens with this thought. And so you got the morning and the evening and the morning and the evening, and clearly in Psalm 3 and Psalm 4 are, but there's more. It's also Psalm 5 and Psalm 6 and Psalm 7 and Psalm 8. So we've got a number of psalms doing that. Well, oddly, of all of those psalms, they all have these superscriptions, except for Psalm 4. Psalm 3 has that superscription. You'll remember the first line in the English Christian Bible, before verse 1, it says, a psalm of David when he fled from Absalom, his son. So there's a superscription to Psalm 3. And there's no superscription to Psalm 4. So you have all these psalms that are now going morning, evening, morning, evening, morning, evening, and there's one that doesn't have a superscription. And it's the evening. So it's almost like, obviously, this one must be connected to that one. And the superscription of that one perhaps maybe applies to this one. Does that make sense? So in other words, you can't tell by reading Psalm 4 that this is related to Absalom, but looks like it is. And so, in fact, there's a number of Jewish scholars of old who have pointed that out. That, for example, Radek, who's a very well-known Jewish scholar, said that what's really happening is Psalm 3 depicts David feeling overwhelmed by the Absalom revolt. You remember Absalom is his son who's plotting to have him killed, and he feels overwhelmed. That's Psalm 3. What's Psalm 4? David finds some emotional peace in the middle of the mess. Okay, so that's kind of how these two psalms seem to fit, and maybe that will help us understand really what's going on in Psalm 4, that he's really got this mess going on with Psalm 3, and I think we're going to see that nothing about the circumstances has changed when we come into Psalm 4, but David has found peace. The circumstances have not changed, and we'll see that. So Psalm 4, bottom of page 3. To the chief musician with stringed instruments, a psalm of David. Well, stringed instruments, in other words, this psalm is sung with only stringed instruments. You might miss that. In other words, not flutes. There's no flutes on this. There's no other instruments, just as it were the violin, okay, or a guitar, or something like that. And then it's given to the chief musician. Well, the word chief musician is a word that literally means an overseer. Okay, that's literally what the word means. But Kyle and Delitzsch, great commentary, I mention it quite often in here, Messianic Jew from 100 years ago and a Christian. And they say that the primary notion of the word is that of shining. But when you put the mem at the beginning of it, it's not just nitzach, it's minitzach, and it shows it's the idea of a person who is eminent in their ability in the department. And as a result of how good they are, they gain this great significance of being the master. They're not just in control. They're not just in authority. They're in that position of authority and oversight because they're just frankly so good. That's really what it's saying. And the idea here is that they are actually shining, as it were. So what this psalm is saying is this psalm is given to this person who is not in this position as though an authority, but in this position as though he is the shining example of what it means to be a worship leader. That's who this psalm is delivered to. Kind of cool. Okay, so on the next page. Hear me when I call, O my God of my righteousness. You have relieved me in my distress. Have mercy on me and hear my prayer. This word distress is a word that means to be in a very tight spot. So when you think of this word distress, you might think of the word stress. Okay, usually when we think of the word stress, we think of bad things, right? I'm under a lot of stress. I remember like 30 years ago taking a class in college. The whole course was on stress management. And there's a difference between good stress and bad stress. And things that are good can be stressful. And so there's actually somebody developed this test of stressful things. Okay? And some are good and some are bad. And if I remember right, if you had 300 points on this test, you had a increased chance of getting some kind of sickness in the next year. And the things that they actually put down as being stressful on that test, having a baby, Christmas, right? They're stressful. They're good, but they're stressful. And then there's things that are bad and they're stressful. And so the point was in that course was this, because your body, your being can't tell the difference. Your being, a Hebraic view of the human being does not say you are a spirit who has a soul and lives in a body. That's wonderful. That's good. That's Greek. That's wonderful. The Hebraic view, I'm not down on that. The Hebraic view says, no, you lose your body, you're out of this planet. You're no longer here. You are a spirit, you are a body, you are a soul, you are all three. And there is no separating you. That's Hebraic. You see the point? The big picture. With that in mind, if you get under a lot of stress, what do? You might go out for a run. You might go to the gym and work out. Why? Because burning off that extra energy physically will release you, help you find release emotionally. Because you're just one being. And that's actually basic psychology here now. Right? So the best thing you can do if you're stressed is go for a walk, go for a run, go to the gym, work out, burn off energy. Does that make sense? It works. I remember when I was studying this, imagining you take a book, take a bunch of books or a lot of papers and put a rubber band around it and leave it like that for a long period of time. And then come back a few years later. This happened to me today. And I took a rubber band off of something that had been there for a while, and it had no elasticity left. And it just broke. I had to get something else. And that's like us. We need to learn how to handle stress to keep the elasticity in our lives. And so this idea of, he says, I was in this place of distress. I was in this place where I was in this tight spot. And he said, You have relieved me. And this word, notice, have relieved. Not you're going to, but he has found some relief. Something has already happened. And this word relieved really means this idea of you've made room for me. I was in this tight spot. I felt pressed in. I felt like I was stuck. I didn't know if I could turn. I didn't know that there was room. If you've been in Israel and you've gone through like Hezekiah's tunnel, and there's places where in some of those tunnels in Israel, you don't have really enough room to turn. There's enough places, there's places there where you can have your shoulders, both shoulders on the walls at the same time. It's if you're afraid of, if you got claustrophobia or you're afraid of the dark, you might not like it. But if you're not like that, it's a great experience. So, but that's the idea there. There's no place to turn. And we've all been there. And I'm not talking about some archaeological fun thing. I'm talking about in our lives. We've all been there where you feel this like tight stress. Okay, but we can tell from the next verse that even though David has found some relief, the circumstances have not changed. But before we do that, first of all, you can see, what is he depending on? He's depending upon his relationship with God, because you'll see the word my righteousness. You're the God of my right. There is a relationship here. And then he says he's depending upon the righteousness of God. He's appealing to God's character. He's not appealing to his character. He's the God of my righteousness. It's not my righteousness. It's his righteousness. That's who he's leaning on. And then something he's already experienced in verse 2. How long, O sons of men, will you turn my glory to shame? How long will you love worthlessness and seek falsehood? Well, something is still going on, because he says, how long will you? So it's not over. You see that? Whatever it was is still in place. David's just feeling different now. He says, first of all, he calls them the sons of men. Sons is plural. Men is actually, even though the English is plural because it fits our English language, but the actual Hebrew, sons is plural and men is singular. And sons of men is B'nai Ish, which is not Ben Adam. The sons of men, not in English, they're both sons of men. But the difference is everybody's a son of Adam. Everybody's the sons of Adam. Not everybody's the sons of Ish. And the sons of Ish carries this idea of people who would kind of stand out. They're not like everybody else. And so what he's saying here is there are some people who stand out, these sons of men, who seem to stand out among everybody else and cause pain for everybody else. I think we've known people like that. You can turn the news on most days, right, and see people like that who are affecting all of our lives, you know, and it's just that there's always people like that. And so these oppressors have the power while the oppressed have no one to comfort them. That's kind of the message. And so in Psalm 4, verse 1, David is saying, God, hear my prayer. And there really is no direct theoretical answer, as it were, to this oppression that is coming from whatever it is, Absalom. There's no direct answer to what he can do other than pray. And what David has found here is that prayer has given him what he needs to be able to get some freedom from the kind of oppression and tight distress when the circumstances haven't even changed. So that he can go to my God, my relationship, the one I'm depending on his righteousness. Whatever righteousness I've got, it's his. He's the God of my righteousness. And I'm getting relief out of this. That's what he's saying here. And this phrase, how long, and you can see the English in this psalm, how long, O sons of men, will you turn my glory to shame. How long will you love worthlessness and seek falsehood? So they put in verse 2, they put how long twice. In the Hebrew, it's actually only in there once. But the implication is actually the way the word biblical commentary puts it, it's actually implied 3 times. And you can see, oh, sons of men, how long is my reputation to be a reproach? How long will you love vanity or emptiness? And how long will you seek lies? So that phrase, how long, is implied, just the parallelism of the thoughts is being implied on all of those phrases. And this idea of falsehood, lies, the word is actually a singular. I thought this was interesting. So he's like, you're seeking out every single little thing that you can possibly find wrong. You're not leaving anything out. Every single thing, every lying pretext that you can to dishonor my personal integrity. They are after his personhood here. They're not really after his kingship in this. That's what he's talking about. He's not complaining about the kingship. He's complaining about the attack against his personhood. And as I thought about that, I think this is something we can all see. It doesn't matter which side of the political aisle you're on. And I'm not defending any of them, but you could go from politician to politician to politician and see the way that the talking heads will attack the children of one politician and then attack the children of the other party's politician. Why do they do that? What is the point of that? The scripture plainly says, don't put a son to death for the sins of his father. Directly says it. And it's not one side of the political aisle. This is the way people do this. They attack the sons of someone. Why? Not because they're really trying to just attack the leader. What they're trying to do is to destroy the person. And that's what David's experiencing here. In verse 3, but know that the Lord has set apart for himself him who is godly. The Lord will hear when I call to him. So godly, a chassid, a holy one, a faithful one, a saint. The word is a person. Sansina says it this way. It refers to a person who demonstrates his love of God in the manner of his life. In other words, I'm living a certain way, and I'm demonstrating this to you, that I am a holy person based on the way that I live. But Sansina says the word can also refer to a person toward whom God manifests his favor or love. In other words, it may not always be used as an example of a person who says, I'm godly because I'm doing well. The word is also used of people that God says, that's a saint because I'm showing my grace to him. So it's used both ways. And you can see, like in Psalm 52, verse 9, it's an example where it's used of a lifestyle. Psalm 52:9. I will praise you forever because you have done it. And in the presence of your saints, I will wait on your name, for it is good. In other words, he's saying, I'm going to do this based upon my lifestyle. And I'm asking you to, Lord, look favorably upon me based upon my lifestyle. That's what Psalm 52, verse 9 says. But Psalm 4, verse 3 is really calling more upon God because it's the God of my righteousness. It's his. So in that case, it's more like, so the word is used both ways. This word saint can be something that's coming from you're a saint because of God, or it can be you're godly because of the way you're living. The word's used both ways. Okay. Then verse 4. And I think this is kind of, if I had a takeaway from this psalm, this is the verse I think we really want to get from this psalm. And you're all going to be very familiar with it. Psalm 4:4, be angry and do not sin. Meditate within your heart on your bed and be still. Well, that probably looks familiar to you because that is essentially Ephesians 4, verse 26. Be angry and do not sin, and do not let the sun go down on your wrath. Paul is quoting this verse. Be angry. The word literally means to tremble, to be agitated, to shake. The Jewish Study Bible, which is the Jewish Publication Society translation, says, "So tremble and sin no more. Ponder it on your bed and sigh." Now, what is David really saying there? And I just never really totally coalesced this in my thinking until preparation for this. David's not talking to himself. David's actually talking to his enemies in this verse. So this is the way Word Biblical Commentary says it. It might be paraphrased as follows. You could tremble with anger and rage, but don't sin by doing anything. You can speak your evil words within your hearts, but don't speak them out loud. Lie still and silent upon your beds, where you can do no harm. The psalmist advises his adversaries to keep their rage within themselves, to maintain control of their actions and their evil words. It was when they spoke out loud and acted, in verse 3, that their inner evil was released to afflict the innocent. And through silence and lack of action would not remove the rot within the person, it would at least curtail its evil effects. Isn't that interesting? That's what he's saying. He's saying he's actually, and who are his adversaries? Absalom, his son. He's essentially saying to his son, now his son can't hear it. David's communing in his own heart, right? But he's essentially saying to someone he deeply loves that he's his adversary who's trying to have him killed. Look, I understand you got some serious issues going on inside your heart. Lie in your bed and be angry. You can tremble, you can shake. Just shut up and don't do anything with it. That's what he's actually saying here. Now, I used to do a lot more with counseling than I do because of my life and my calling and the things that have changed. But there are certain books that I read when I studied counseling that just stood out to me. And so when I know that I've talked on this topic of anger before. And so I went and found this book on my shelves. Let me just say some things about me and anger. Everybody can get angry. I'm not a person, I know that if Donna could think of examples when I've gotten angry. And I know my kids did. But I'm not a person who's given, like some people are like more given to anger. And I know this is true about me, and here's how I know it. I didn't even think of it until I was as I was just literally walking in the building to come to the room here. I had my best friend. We're still friends. We don't talk often. Once in a while we do. We Facebooked, messaged each other recently, 2 weeks ago. Our older son's got his middle name from him. So we're friends from 5th grade. Okay, so when I was in 12th grade, I was with him. We grew up in the suburbs. We were sitting on the curb on the side. We used to cut a lot of lawns together. And my friend Steve Canale, he said, you know, Greg, we'd been friends from 5th grade. This is 12th grade. He said, I've never seen you angry. Didn't even occur to me. But when your best friend, a guy that you live with day in, day out, all the time, can say after 7 years, I've never seen you angry. And he wasn't saying it because I was angry. I have no idea why he said it. But that just tells me I'm not a person given to anger. But that doesn't mean I haven't been angry. Doesn't mean my kids wouldn't probably be able to think of some examples, right? Or my wife. But I'm not a blow up person. But this section here, this little, and I typed the whole thing out because I couldn't find a digital copy of this. But I really wanted to share this with you because I think this is really, really good, just a really, really good, well-written stuff that I think is very helpful. Most of us do, however, automatically respond with anger to frustrating or painful circumstances. I'm not suggesting that we repress our anger, pretend it doesn't exist, and force the words, "Thank you, Lord," in an effort to prove how much we trust him. So often people disguise resentment because they regard such feelings as unbecoming to a Christian. They are but hiding them. But hiding them only compounds the problem. There's a difference between personally owning and acknowledging anger and freely venting in an angry attack. The former, that is personally owning and acknowledging the anger, the former is necessary. The latter, that is freely venting in an angry attack, is sinful. Now, before we read on anymore, let me just give you a thought about anger that I've observed, I've studied, I've seen this. Anger is a unique emotion. Anger is not a primary emotion. It's a secondary emotion. You feel hurt, and so you get angry. That's anger. Anger is not a primary emotion. But one of the problems with letting it out, and a lot of people say, well, you gotta let it out, catharsis. There's truth there. But one of the problems with anger is it's a self-feeding emotion. If you let it out, it will feed itself, and you will be angrier. But if you don't let it out, you're going to be like that rubber band. So you got to figure out how you're going to let this anger out in some kind of a controlled way, because it is going to feed itself. Because when you let anger out, it's a secondary emotion. You're going to feel more of it, and you're going to get angrier. And that's how anger works. And it's never a primary emotion. So it always feels justified. They hurt me. We'll read on. The depressed person should deal with his anger not by resentfully attacking the source of hurt pain, but after, and I put these, they're not in the note, they're not in the quote, the green boxes with the numbers. I added them just to make it easy for those who are like me and like to make lists and 1, 2, 3, 4. I did that for you. Okay. So the depressed person should deal with his anger not by resentfully attacking the source of hurt and pain, but after first fully acknowledging the felt anger. I'm angry. And second, confessing it as the sin of misplaced dependency. Okay, so your toaster breaks and you get angry. Your coffee machine breaks and you get angry. Why did you get angry? Because I was depending on it for a cup of coffee this morning. Anger is basically an emotion that says, I feel let down. I was dependent. When we get angry, this, I think, can help us to recognize that an expression of anger is essentially an expression of, and it'll help us if we recognize, it's not an expression of strength, it's an expression of weakness. It is always an expression of dependency. I was counting on you, and you let me down. It's not that I'm strong, it's that I'm a weak child. That might help us control it. So number 2, confessing it as the sin of misplaced dependency. And number 3, thanking God for the event which triggered this anger, not his anger, this anger. Believing that God is lovingly providing in every circumstance exactly what is best for my spiritual growth in becoming more like Jesus. Curse God and die? Continue to depend on others for security needs? Deal with your hurt by expressing your anger in an open attack? Never really become secure in God's love? Die as a person? Remain unloved? No. Don't curse God and die. Thank God and live. Rest in the security of God's sovereign love. Be deeply secure as a person who thoroughly depends on God alone, trusting him though he slay you. He always desires our best. Thank God and live the full, rich, personally satisfied life of one whose deep personal needs for security are met in the person of Jesus Christ. I had to give you all that because I wanted to give you the rest of this quote, but it would have made no sense without that first part. Let me illustrate the point with a rather trivial personal incident. About a year ago, our family went on a trip to Disney World. We packed the car, stopped at the orange groves to purchase fresh Florida orange juice, and began our 3.5-hour journey in the highest of spirits. Our two boys, at that time 3 and 5 years old, were restlessly excited. My wife was smiling, and I was glowing inside with the anticipation of a fun family outing. 15 minutes away from home, we had a flat tire. In what is hopefully becoming less typical fashion, I responded with furious impatience, angrily pulling the car to the side of the turnpike, slamming the door as I got out, then jerking up the trunk to get the jack. My wife quickly poured a cup of cool orange juice for me in an effort to lower my emotional temperature. With a scowl, I gulped the juice and remained at boiling level. And then it hit me. I was not at that moment loving my wife as Christ loved the church, or even coming close. Nor was I at that moment bringing up my children in the nurture and the admonition of the Lord. I was guilty of committing grievous sins which I had often counseled and preached against. And yet, even with this realization, I felt trapped by my anger. My problem was not so much the direction of my anger as it was the presence of anger. I was, in plain terms, mad about what had happened. I was not getting my way. Expressing my irritation in healthy, acceptable ways did not seem to be the solution. Getting it out of my system was the goal, but shouting, kicking the tire, and slamming the trunk down did not seem to move me toward that goal at all. In fact, it tended to have quite the opposite effect. It's that self-feeding emotion. Forcing a smile, another alternative, seemed at worst impossible and at best hypocritical. I wanted to rid myself of the anger and to enjoy a deep, real inner calm. But how to do it? The words of Paul in Ephesians 5:20 floated into my consciousness. Giving thanks always for all things. For a flat tire? But I do not enjoy flat tires and can see no advantage to having one. As a matter of fact, I had discovered that my tire was ruined beyond repair. But it further occurred to me that the God who is sovereign and omnipotent could certainly have prevented that flat tire. And it dawned on me with fresh intensity that this mighty God loves me with an everlasting and perfect love. If I really believe these things and set my mind to think on them, setting your mind on biblical truth in the middle of frustrating circumstances is most of the battle, then believing that all things must work together for good, if these things are so, I had a rational basis for giving thanks for the flat tire. Notice, I did not feel like giving thanks, but the facts supported the behavior of giving thanks as an expression of rational, logical faith. Again, notice the order. Begin with the facts. By faith, act on them. The feelings will come. Feelings, I'll just interject. I've taught on this 6 months or a year ago. Feelings always follow what you think and what you act on. Your thinking and your actions. Feelings always follow them. 100% of the time. I went on to consider, still standing by the side of a broken down car on the turnpike, the overwhelmingly comforting truth that nothing can ever happen to me that my mighty, loving Father does not permit. He who freely gave me his Son will not hold back any good thing, even a flat tire. In order to appreciate the kind of good thing that included flat tires, it became immediately apparent that my life must be thoroughly dedicated to God's purposes. Flat tires were by no means good if my priorities were self-determined goals, like arriving at Disney World by such and such a time with a certain sum in my wallet. This observation suggested a general principle. Whenever I have difficulty in giving thanks for something which happens in my world, it is likely that my goal at that moment is something other than conformity to the image of Christ. If I have you, I could read that sentence 16 times. Whenever I have difficulty in giving thanks for something that happens in my world, it is likely that my goal is at that moment something different, other than conformity to the image of Christ. If I have yielded to Christ every right to what I may desire and am fixing my will to live for his purpose, which brings me significance, I am in position to rationally thank God for everything because I rest secure in the knowledge that whatever happens can be turned into a growth experience for me. And another principle becomes evident. It is not what happens to me that matters. It is how I respond to what happens. If I respond with anger, because I mistakenly believe that my needs are threatened or because my goals are self-determined, I run the risk of depression and resentment. But if I respond with thanksgiving, meekly accepting all that God provides, I become more like the one who submitted to the hands of evil men because he delighted to do his Father's will, secure in a loving relationship that would never fail. I love that whole section. It's a great book. Larry Crabb, I put the tiny little basic principles of biblical counseling. It's a very small book. He was a major writer in biblical counseling. He wrote a book called Inside Out. Maybe some of you read that. Major writer in the 70s, maybe 80s too. Worth reading. If you are a person who is struggling with anger or you know someone who is, you might think about that anger workbook. Then the reason I picked this psalm, we're going to finish here in 5 minutes, is because of this, the parsha was on good offerings versus bad offerings, right? And Psalm 4 verse 5 goes right there. Offer the sacrifices of righteousness and put your trust in the Lord. There's two ways to translate that. One of them is the sacrifices of righteousness, and that would correlate with Psalms 51, verses 18 and 19. Do good in your pleasure to Zion, build the walls of Jerusalem, then you will be pleased with sacrifices of righteousness, with burnt offerings and whole burnt offerings. Then they shall offer bulls on your altar. So in other words, offer sacrifices that show you have, basically offer the sacrifices of righteousness. The sacrifices they're righteous. And then the other possibility is the way Radek and Ibn Ezra say, which it should be sacrifices in righteousness. And the idea here would be get your life together first and then bring your offering. That would fit like what Jesus said. When Yeshua said, if you have aught against your brother, leave your offering at the altar and go get that right first. Okay, so there's two ways to translate it, and they both would have value. On the top of page 8. There are many who say, who will show us any good? Lord, lift up the light of your countenance upon us. Well, lift up the light of your countenance upon us is a clear allusion to the Aaronic benediction. The Lord bless you and keep you. In a moment, Steve, you're going to do it, Steve? Steve will come up and he'll do the Aaronic benediction. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you, be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. It's clearly an allusion to that. Clearly, this begs this question. Then would it bring blessing into our lives if we actually prayed the Aaronic blessing over ourselves? Because it seems that David essentially is. And by the way, if you think about this phrase right here, lift up the light of your countenance upon us, you might remember that at the beginning, this psalm was given to the chief musician, who is a person who is shining in his career. And now this chief musician who is shining, and now David has come back to this thought, and he's saying, God, would you shine on me? That's beautiful poetically. In verse 7, you've put gladness in my heart more than in the season that their grains and wine increased. This is an interesting observation by Kylan Delich. Perhaps it was the time of the Feast of Tabernacles. Okay, and why would he say that? Look on the right, 2 Samuel 17. So Israel and Absalom encamped in the land of Gilead. Now it happened when David had come to Mahanaim that Shobi, the son of Nahash from Rabbah of the people of Ammon, and it says in verse 28, brought beds and basins, earthen vessels, wheat, barley, flour, parched grains and beans, lentils and parched seeds, honey and curds, sheep and cheese of the herd, for David and his people who were with him to eat, for they said the people were hungry and weary. In other words, all this food was brought to David because the people with him were hungry. And so what the picture is, David's people were hungry. Absalom's people probably weren't hungry. In other words, Absalom's people had all that. Why did they have all that? Because it must have been the season of harvest for all of that. Which then suggests that this psalm probably, perhaps, Kylan Delich is saying, it could be that this is actually a psalm associated with the Feast of Tabernacles when all of that would have been harvested. Kind of an interesting thing placing it. And then in verse 8, I will both lie down in peace and sleep, for you alone, O Lord, make me dwell in safety. You, O Lord, make me dwell in security. And he says, I will both lie down in peace and sleep, both peace and sleep. And this both is almost always translated with the English word together. So I'm going to get both. So David, this word for peace is shalom. Earlier, David challenged his enemies to essentially handle themselves on their bed, get a hold of their peace while on their bed. And essentially what David is saying now is, okay, I am on my bed, and I'm going to experience a peaceful night of sleep. Right? And as I thought about this, I thought about the time when David in 1 Samuel 26 stopped his men from putting the spear through King Saul's head. And David's now lying on his bed, and he's saying, I have peace of mind. And it's kind of like he's saying, I've got peace, and I am okay, and my world has not changed. The circumstances are still the same. Absalom is still coming after me, but my God is in control. And he has come to the place that Larry Crabb described, where he can actually give thanks. That's a great psalm, isn't it? Praise the Lord.